All right, so get ready because today we're taking a deep dive into the future of horror.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, specifically, we're looking at the year 2025.
Okay.
And you shared this really interesting podcast with me called 2025, The Year Horror Goes Viral.
Yeah, I
It
did.
paints a really vivid picture of what might be coming.
It does.
But the big question for me is,
Yeah.
is the hype real?
Mm,
Is 2025 really going to be this breakout year for horror?
right.
And if so, what's driving it?
Well, the podcast points to three major trends that are fueling this potential horror boom.
Okay.
AI-generated nightmares,
Okay.
a whole new breed of zombies,
Uh-huh.
and incredibly immersive VR horror experiences.
Okay, so let's start with AI.
Okay.
The idea of a horror movie tapping into your deepest fears in real time,
Right?
it's fascinating and a little unsettling.
Yeah.
The podcast actually mentioned that studios like A24
Mm-hmm.
are already experimenting with this.
Yeah, they are.
I mean, do you think it's really possible to personalize fear in that way?
I think it's definitely a possibility
Okay.
because AI algorithms can analyze massive amounts of data,
Right.
including your online activity, your
Mhm.
viewing habits,
Right.
even your physiological responses to stimuli.
Wow.
So imagine an algorithm that knows exactly what images, sounds, and storylines will trigger your deepest anxieties,
Oh, God.
and then uses that information to craft a personalized nightmare just for you.
Okay, that is taking personalization to a whole new level.
It is.
Almost makes you think twice about accepting those cookie notices online.
Exactly. And, it raises all sorts of ethical questions, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
About manipulation and consent.
Yeah.
Are we comfortable with algorithms having that level of control over our emotional experiences?
It's a good question.
Yeah,
Then there's the whole resurgence of zombies.
right.
I know they've been a staple in horror for decades,
They have.
but it sounds like they're getting a serious upgrade in 2025.
Yeah. Zombie 2.0.
Zombie 2.0.
Wow.
That's behind this phenomenon.
Well, the podcast argues that zombies are evolving to reflect our current anxieties.
Okay.
We're not scared of mindless, flesh-eating ghouls anymore.
Right.
We're seeing eco-terror zombies,
Mhm.
mutated by climate change.
Oh, well.
Zombies driven by AI.
Okay.
And even as the podcast jokingly put it, TikTok dance zombies.
Okay, the dance zombies do sound a little far-fetched,
They do.
but I get it.
Yeah.
Horror has to evolve to stay relevant.
Right, exactly. It's not just about novelty, though.
Oh.
The specific ways in which zombies are evolving,
Right.
they actually tell us something about the things that are keeping us up at night.
That makes sense.
Climate collapse,
Mhm.
the unchecked power of technology,
Mhm.
the fear of losing our individuality.
Yeah.
These are all themes that are bubbling up in this new wave of zombie narrative.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
The podcast even shared a soundbite from a special effects makeup artist
Oh, really?
who said, and I quote, "Audiences want realism. Rotten teeth aren't enough anymore.
It's so true.
I mean, we are demanding more from our monsters.
Yeah.
We want them to be believable to reflect the complexities of the world we live in.
Right.
And maybe by facing those fears in a fictional setting, it actually helps us process the very real anxieties we have about the future."
Yeah.
The podcast even went so far as to suggest that horror is the new therapy.
Interesting.
What do you make of that?
It's a bold claim,
It is.
but there might be some truth to it.
Okay.
Horror allows us to experience intense emotions like fear and disgust
Mm,
in a safe, controlled environment.
right.
It's a way of confronting our anxieties without actually being in danger.
So it's like a form of exposure therapy.
Yeah.
We face our fears in a fictional setting,
Uh-huh.
and maybe that helps us become more resilient in real life.
It's a fascinating theory.
Yeah.
The podcast gives some really compelling examples.
Okay.
They talk about a new season of The Last of Us
Okay.
that features these horrifying fungal zombies invading Europe, which plays on our fears of pandemics and ecological collapse. And then there's that sequel to the Netflix show Zom 100,
Right.
which uses zombies as a metaphor for burnout culture.
Mhm.
It seems like zombies are becoming this canvas for exploring all sorts of societal anxieties.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And it's not just film and TV either.
Right.
The podcast also mentions Resident Evil 9,
Oh, yeah.
where the zombies are supposedly AI-driven and adapt to your gameplay.
Oh, wow.
That's terrifying.
Imagine a zombie that learns your weaknesses,
Oh my gosh.
that knows exactly how to scare you.
Yeah.
That taps into our fear of technology becoming unpredictable and even malevolent.
It's like technology is taking this classic zombie trope
Yeah.
and amplifying it. making it even more relatable to our current anxieties.
Right.
And it's not even confined to gangs either.
No.
There's that whole TikTok hashtag zombie apocalypse challenge.
Right.
Where people are sharing their survival tips.
Yeah, it's hilarious.
It's like we're trying to find humor in the face of potential apocalypse.
Exactly.
So zombies are everywhere in 2025.
They are.
And they seem to be tapping into our deepest fears about the world.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not all doom and gloom, is it?
No, it's not.
There's also the rise of VR.
Right.
Which promises to make horror even more immersive.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, terrifying.
Absolutely. The podcast highlights how companies like Oculus are developing full-body VR experiences that go beyond just sight and sound.
Wow.
So imagine feeling the touch of a zombie's rotting flesh or the chill of a ghostly presence.
Okay, that's a level of immersion I'm not sure I'm ready for.
I hear you.
But I can see the appeal.
Yeah.
It's like stepping into your own personal horror movie.
It is. And it raises some interesting questions about the psychology of fear, too.
Right.
You know, how will our brains and bodies react when horror becomes that real?
That's a good question. This deep dive is already proving to be a wild ride.
It is.
It seems like 2025 is going to be a landmark year for horror. I think so. But with all these advancements and trends, are there any downsides?
That's a good question.
Are we sacrificing something in our pursuit of bigger scares and more immersive experiences?
That's something the podcast grapples with as well.
Okay.
And it's something we should definitely explore further.
All right. So in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the potential dark side of this horror boom.
Okay.
And the ethical dilemmas it presents.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned.
It's fascinating how horror just keeps evolving with technology, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
It's like as we kind of push the boundaries of what's possible with technology, we inevitably create all these new avenues for fear and fascination.
You're right. We were just talking about AI and VR.
Yeah.
And how they're taking horror to a whole new level.
Yeah, they really are.
But I have to admit, the idea of personalized nightmares generated by an algorithm.
Right.
It does raise some red flags for me.
I understand that concern.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a fine line between personalization and manipulation.
Right.
Imagine a horror film that not only knows your deepest fears, but also knows how to exploit them for maximum impact.
It's like giving horror movies a direct line to our subconscious.
Right.
Like, where does the entertainment end?
Right.
And the manipulation begin?
That's a really crucial question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we really need to consider, I think, as AI becomes increasingly sophisticated.
Right.
If we're not careful, we could end up in a situation where our emotional experiences are being curated and controlled by algorithms without our full understanding or even our consent.
And it's not just about the potential for manipulation either.
No.
It's also the whole issue of access and control.
Right.
You know, who owns these algorithms?
Exactly.
Who gets to decide what scares us?
That's right. I mean, if horror becomes completely personalized, there's a real risk that it could be used to target specific individuals or even specific groups with malicious intent. Imagine a deepfake horror film designed to discredit or humiliate someone by putting their face on a monstrous creature.
You mentioned deepfakes earlier.
Yeah.
And, the podcast brought up that hypothetical Tom Cruise vampire movie.
Right.
And while it sounds entertaining on the surface, it does raise some serious ethical concerns.
It does.
Yeah, I mean, using someone's likeness without their consent to create a horror film, even for entertainment purposes, it's a violation of their privacy.
It is.
It's a form of identity theft.
Exactly.
It's a slippery slope.
It is.
And I think it's important to establish some really clear ethical guidelines for the use of deepfake technology in entertainment.
I agree.
And it's not just deepfakes that are blurring the lines between reality and fiction.
No.
The increasing realism in horror, particularly when it comes to zombies, is also raising concerns about potential psychological harm.
You're talking about trauma horror.
Yeah, exactly.
This trend toward extreme realism and graphic violence.
Yeah.
The kind that might trigger traumatic memories or anxieties in viewers.
Exactly. The podcast mentioned the sequel to Hereditary as being particularly intense in that regard.
Right.
While some people might appreciate that raw, visceral nature of that kind of horror, others might find it deeply disturbing.
Right.
or even harmful.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
It is.
Horror has always been about kind of pushing boundaries and exploring the darker aspects of human experience.
Right.
But we also need to be mindful of the potential impact on viewers' mental health.
So how do we find that balance?
That's the question.
How do we ensure that horror remains thrilling and thought-provoking
Right.
without crossing the line into exploitation or gratuitous violence?
Well, I think transparency is key.
Okay.
Filmmakers and studios, they really need to be upfront about the content of their films
Okay.
and the potential for psychological impact. Maybe a rating system that goes beyond those age restrictions.
Yeah.
Something that provides more nuanced information about the emotional and psychological intensity of a film. That would be helpful.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
It would give viewers more control over their viewing choices.
Exactly.
And protect those who might be more susceptible to trauma or anxiety.
It's about empowering viewers to make informed decisions about what they watch.
Absolutely. Speaking of informed decisions, let's circle back to the idea of horror as therapy.
Okay.
The podcast made that bold claim.
They did.
And I'm still not sure what to make of it.
Yeah.
Can watching scary movies really be therapeutic?
You know, it's a complex issue.
It is.
On the one hand, there is some evidence to suggest that controlled exposure to fear-inducing stimuli, like horror films, can actually help people desensitize themselves to anxiety and fear.
So by facing our fears in a fictional setting, we might be able to manage them better in real life.
Exactly. But on the other hand, we have to remember that not everyone reacts to horror the same way.
Of course.
For some people, watching scary movies might actually exacerbate existing anxieties.
Right.
Or even trigger traumatic memories.
It's not a one-size-fits-all approach to mental health.
Precisely. And it's so important to be aware of our own limits.
Yeah.
You know, if a particular horror film or subgenre makes you feel overly anxious or distressed, it's totally fine to step away from it.
Yeah, absolutely. So horror can be a powerful tool for exploring the human psyche.
It can be.
But it's not a substitute for professional therapy or mental health care.
Absolutely. And as with any form of entertainment, it's important to consume horror responsibly and with a critical eye.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of consuming responsibly, the podcast offered a really interesting suggestion for engaging with horror on a deeper level.
Oh, really?
They recommended hosting a horror movie marathon.
Okay.
With a twist.
What's the twist?
Analyze the underlying anxieties and fears that each film explores.
Oh, the horror movie book club.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic idea.
It's about going beyond the jump scares and the gore.
Yeah.
To really understand what the film's trying to say.
Right.
About our fears and anxieties.
It's about turning passive viewing into an active and engaging experience.
And it can lead to some really fascinating discussions and insights about ourselves and the world around us.
For sure. Okay, so we've explored the potential downsides of this horror boom, from those ethical implications of AI and deepfakes to the psychological impact of trauma horror.
Yeah, but I'm curious, what do you see as like the potential benefits of this resurgence in horror?
That's a great question. I think one of the most important benefits of horror is that it allows us to confront our fears in a safe, controlled environment. By experiencing fear vicariously through characters on screen, we can actually learn to cope with those emotions and maybe even develop a sense of mastery over them.
It's like a dress rehearsal for real-life anxiety.
Exactly. Horror also provides a space for exploring those like taboo topics. And challenging societal norms. It can be a really powerful tool for social commentary. And for raising awareness about important issues.
And it can be a lot of fun.
It can.
There's a reason why people keep coming back to horror. Even though it scares them. There's a thrill, a sense of excitement that comes with confronting the unknown.
Absolutely. Horror can be cathartic, exhilarating, and even thought-provoking. It's a genre that has the power to both entertain and enlighten.
So even with all the potential downsides that we've discussed, there's still a lot to appreciate about the power of horror.
Absolutely. Horror is a complex and multifaceted genre.
It is.
And its resurgence in 2025. It's a testament to its enduring appeal.
It seems like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the technological advancements driving the horror boom to the ethical and psychological dilemmas it presents.
We have.
but I feel like there's still so much to unpack.
You're right. We've only scratched the surface of this topic.
Yeah.
And in the final part of our deep dive, we'll delve into the deeper meaning behind these trends, exploring what they reveal about our collective anxieties and hopes for the future.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We've talked about all these trends driving horror in 2025.
We have.
But what I find really fascinating is what these trends actually say about us as a society. Like, if horror really reflects our anxieties, what does this 2025 landscape reveal?
It's a really thought-provoking question.
It is.
And I think it speaks to a kind of collective unease about the future.
Yeah.
I mean, take the rise of AI-generated nightmares, for instance.
Okay.
It really highlights our fascination with technology, but also our very deep-seated fear of it.
It's like we're both drawn to and repelled by the power of AI.
Yeah.
We want those personalized experiences, but we're also afraid of losing control of what scares us, of algorithms knowing our vulnerabilities better than we do.
Precisely. It's a fear of the unknown, of technology kind of surpassing human understanding and becoming unpredictable, even malevolent.
Right.
The idea that our own creations could turn against us.
Yeah.
It's a classic horror trope.
It is.
And it just seems particularly relevant now in the age of AI.
And it's not just AI that's fueling those anxieties.
Right.
The resurgence of zombies in all their gruesome and varied forms.
Yeah.
I think it points to like a more primal fear.
Okay.
A fear of societal collapse and the loss of individual agency.
Absolutely. Zombies represent chaos.
Yeah.
The breakdown of order.
Yeah.
The primal fear of being overrun by a force we can't control or understand.
Yeah. In a world facing pandemics.
Yeah.
Climate change, political instability.
Right.
It's no wonder zombies are resonating so strongly with people.
It makes sense.
It's like we're rehearsing for the apocalypse.
Yeah.
Playing out our worst case scenarios in a safe fictional setting.
Right. But it's not all doom and gloom, is it?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also like a certain dark humor in some of these zombie narratives.
There is?
Like the TikTok dance zombies we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah. Those dance zombies.
Yeah.
That's a really fascinating element.
It is.
It's like we're finding ways to just laugh at the absurdity of it all.
Yeah.
To cope with all that overwhelming anxiety.
Right.
By injecting a bit of levity into the darkness.
Gallows humor at its finest.
Exactly.
Maybe it's a way of like reclaiming some power in the face of fear.
Yeah.
A way of saying, even if the world is ending, we're going to face it with a bit of humor.
Right.
And defiance.
I think that's a really insightful observation.
Well, thanks.
Humor can be such a powerful coping mechanism, a way of processing trauma and anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's so often present in horror, even in those like darkest and most disturbing narratives.
Okay, so if we were to distill all of this down into a single message, what would 2025 horror be telling us about ourselves and the future we're creating?
I think it's a message of both warning and resilience.
Okay.
It's a warning about the potential consequences of our choices.
Yeah.
The dangers of unchecked technological advancement, the fragility of our social structures.
Yeah.
But it's also a message of resilience.
Right.
Of our capacity for humor and hope.
Right.
Even in the face of fear and uncertainty.
It's a reminder that we actually have the power to shape the future.
Yeah.
To choose how we respond to the challenges we face. Whether we succumb to fear or rise to the occasion, the choice is ultimately ours.
That's a really powerful message.
Yeah, it is.
And one that's worth remembering as we kind of navigate all the uncertainties of the future.
This has been an incredible deep dive into the future of horror.
It has.
We've explored some fascinating trends.
We have.
We've grappled with some pretty tough ethical dilemmas.
Yeah.
And uncovered some really profound insights, I think.
Yeah.
About our collective anxieties and hopes.
It's been a pleasure exploring this with you.
Likewise.
And I hope our listeners have found it as thought-provoking as we have.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of 2025 horror, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic on your own.
Yeah.
What scares you? What excites you?
Good questions.
And what does it all say about the future we're creating?
Remember the future of horror.
Yes.
And perhaps the future itself is in your hands.
Until next time, stay curious.
Stay engaged.
And never stop exploring the dark corners of your imagination.